evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
89.3 Mahoning Drive-In Radio, your old friend Virgil back once again for another exciting episode of the podcast. As you guys know, the only podcast dedicated to the love and revival of our beloved drive-in culture. Joined as always by my co-host and general manager extraordinaire, Mark. Say hello, Mark.
Hello.
And we got King Jeff in the house, projectionist and owner extraordinaire. Jeff, say hello, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Nice to have you with us.
Now, when we started this podcast venture, it really was about shining a light on the culture across the country of the drive-ins past and present. Born off of that was bringing in some staple businesses that have been responsible for the drive-in experience, culture, and everything that surrounds it. And when you talk about the drive-in, the first thing that comes to mind is the towering screens that live in front of us, bigger and larger than life. And today we have Mark and Zach Spatz and Dave McIlvane with us, all owners of Selby Screens out of Richfield, Ohio. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
What a pleasure.
So excited. A little inside baseball. We've been going back and forth to lock down the time to do this interview. So it's a long time coming, but I think the fans will truly appreciate hearing what the magic of Selby is. And I'll just give a little brief intro before I ask you guys about the history of Selby. But the first drive-in screen you guys built was in 1947. And you're still doing it to this day. That is incredible. So, Dave, why don't you give us a little bit of history? From what I understand, you've been with the business a little bit longer.
Yeah, so I come from a construction background in general, heavy industrial background. And I happened to be looking for an industrial warehouse in the Richfield, Akron area, and we found this building owned by Jerry Selby. We were using it for warehousing purposes, not for building screens. But as I got to know Jerry, I learned more about his business and the history of the company, multi-generational business. And we were buying the building from him, and Jerry came to me a couple of months later and said, "Hey, I'd like to lease back some of the space. I've got a movie screen to build." And I said, "Well, that's fantastic. Of course, we've got plenty of room in here." So he started building one, and I was back there watching him fabricate these things. So the way they do this is they fabricate the trusses in the warehouse and then ship them out in pieces, large pieces, usually 2 to 3 towers per column. So, it takes weeks and weeks, months really to build all these things. That's where all the hard work goes, and all the engineering is in building these trusses. And Jerry's father was a brilliant engineer and came up with this design. And the more I sort of dove into it with him and heard the history of the family and how they had done this, and the building that we are in was built in the 60s. And they had subsequently added on to it over the years and made it into just a great steel fabrication facility. The more I got interested in it, the more I thought it might be fun to try to build one. So Jerry took me under his wing and showed me the ropes, everything from steel fabrication in the shop. And then we, of course, went out and erected a number of these over the years. And I just thought it was great. And one of the things I learned is this whole subculture of drive-in movie aficionados who, just love the nostalgia and the experience of, watching movies outdoors. So the more I watched and learned, the more I wanted to, see if we could carry this torch forward a little bit. So
we love that so much. Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of a lot of the drive-ins that are running that aren't family owned have a very similar situation as you. They came in, they took the love and the passion for what the business has to offer, and carries it on somehow. And that's the beautiful thing about your guys' business is you're synonymous with the drive-in culture, but you're still alive, you know? You're still rocking and rolling to this day.
Yes, and it was a really steep learning curve for me. And Jerry, his knowledge of the business is just unparalleled, quite frankly. I mean, they not only built the screens, they owned some of the theaters in the area.
Yeah.
So they knew the business inside and out. I mean, he's just a wealth of information, and I learned so much from him.
And Jerry's second generation?
That's correct. His father started the company.
That's incredible. So you guys, the thing that stands out is the promotion. And a lot of times the nostalgia of promotion, especially in the drive-in culture, is as much of an allure and pull as the actual product is, you know, from the screen ads to the books that we would get in the projection booth, things like that. So when did you guys find that Selby kind of saw its boom? Was it around the 60s, I guess, when they got the warehouse?
Yes. Yeah. They bought the property back in the 60s. It was an industrial development. And they actually fabricated at the beginning outdoors. They just worked out in the field, and they really built this business literally from the ground up.
Wow.
Pardon my pun.
Yeah.
But they literally, you know, as the business grew, they built facilities to accommodate it. And, you know, they started with a 10,000 square foot building, ended up with a 20,000 square foot building, and then added another couple thousand feet for office space.
Right.
So it was just one of those businesses that really took off in the 60s and 70s. And they built, I think, around 2,000 screens, if you can believe that. Literally all over the country, and some international screens as well.
It seems like the business followed the you know, kind of the wave of the whole drive-in movie theater market. Like they were in it in the right place at the right time, and
they were there for the boom.
Yep, and they simply thoughtfully rode the wave as it boomed, and then, you know, obviously as it's declined also.
Right. Well, the thing I love about, you know, all the surviving remaining drive-ins and also the businesses that, you know, have built those drive-ins, you found a way to navigate. You found a way to run your business and make it work, even though the industry, the landscape, everything else is changing around you seemingly every year.
Yeah, because if you don't do that, then you don't exist.
That's right. That's right. So those big boom days, obviously drive-ins were kind of your bag, but did it expand beyond that? Really, anybody who needed a screen or a structure, or was it strictly drive-in screens for a while?
Oh no, Jerry's family are consummate, entrepreneurs, engineers. So they're always looking for opportunities out there. So they got into, and in fact, invented what's known as the monolithic billboard. I don't know if you're familiar with 480 in Cleveland, but monolithic billboards are basically one, as the term indicates, one pole that comes up out of the ground instead of having all that structure, just one
single
pole. And they actually invented that. So they branched into that and all manner of steel fabrication. They got into some outdoor steel furniture at one point. They got into the structural sign business for a while. You know, those backlit illuminated signs you see that project from a building.
Oh yeah.
You know, they would fabricate the steel and then get someone to build the illuminated panels that go in the front.
Right.
And so what they always sort of sought were niche businesses, things that people just, you know, weren't doing. There are a lot, you know, because Jerry and I talked about this at one point. I said, well, you know, maybe we should just do fabrication, you know, of all sorts. And he said, there are welding shops everywhere in Ohio because it's an industrial state, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you need to find markets where the margins are better and the competition is scarce. So they're very nimble about, you know, finding those areas of business that, you know, were new to the area, and they would work them until they got they would get flooded with competition and they would move on to another business model. So they were just, you know, the type of guys that really knew how to stay nimble and use what they had to further the business.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that's so impressive about Selby is, your guys' presence really became dominant, and it became, hey, Selby Screens can offer their screen, but then it became, the light barriers, the traffic barriers. You guys were doing speaker posts and poles, box offices. You offered painting. Like, you were pretty much an all-around screen service or drive-in service.
Yeah, that's right. And, their knowledge extended to even, how best to position the projection rooms. And,
yes,
they knew the business inside and out. And like you said, they would build the whole thing for you. If you wanted, a canopy to drive in through, or if there was a highway on the other side that you needed panels to block headlight or any other sort of light pollution, they would build that stuff. So they would do it all.
That's just incredible. So that's what I'm really curious about, and I'm sure the guys are as well. How much of each project is, let's say, a pre-existing design versus kind of the on-the-spot need of the owner or layout of the project?
Well, what Jerry has is a portfolio of different trusses out there.
As the engineer in the group, the resident geek, it's a combination of knowledge of of what's needed, a menu of structures, primarily trusses, and then purlins that go across, and then the footers. So you've got that knowledge, you've got this menu of components. And then what you do is, based on the specific site, you assemble those components, into a design. So
right.
It's sort of like, when you order your car, a brand new car, you can order the Impala, and then you have these 20 or 30 different things to make it your car.
The
right?
TS, the XT, the XL package. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a combination of both, right? You've got a menu of components, and then they get assembled to meet the demands of that particular site and those particular soil conditions, and all the things that go with the vagaries of construction.
Right. Well, I mean, it segues a little bit. You are the engineer of the group. Your son, Zach, handles the socials. We heard a little bit about how Dave came into things with Jerry. Did you guys come in a little bit after that and team up with Dave? Is that how it worked?
Dave and I go back a long way, 15 years or so. So shortly after this, Dave started with Jerry. One of the things I've done is acted as a business advisor for at least a couple of Dave's efforts. And he was looking over this whole project, and we were discussing just kind of the business model in general.
Yeah.
And, my response was like, I'd love to get in on that.
And, you're like intrigued.
Yeah. And then I'll just toot Zach's horn. He was born an entrepreneur. So any kind of new project, new business, he's just automatically interested in. So he's more than carried his weight for sure.
Sees the opportunity, and we know it. We know how important the hat that Zach wears is. The awareness of what you guys do is just as important as what you actually do.
Yeah. It's I mean, just playing to this, this kind of passionate market, and it's been an education. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, going back to Dave, what do you find, at least from Jerry, that balance is between need and pre-existing design?
The way it's set up is that there are a number of truss designs out there that they've already done. So they'll come to the owner and say, what size screen do you want? And then when, and what kind of configuration is it? And, what's the shape of the site?
Yep.
And then he'll help site the screen and then come up with a design from these pre-engineered plans that will accommodate the owner. So everything's custom, but it all comes from a sort of a broad template. That makes sense.
The tried and true tested models, if you will.
Exactly. I mean, they've been doing these for decades. They, can withstand high winds, all kinds of severe weather out there. they're known as the Cadillac of the industry.
I mean, that's the beauty is, you guys, even with the promotions that we see and we run at the theater, there's some amazing ones. One that I pulled up recently was like a horror related one where you had Frankenstein on a screen and it said, over the years, Selby Screen Towers have weathered some horrible things. And then it goes
That's
into,
great.
how many
That's great.
different screens you guys have built and, what they can withstand. That's the type of stuff that, really stands out. And I imagine that's the type of stuff that Zach's digging up and sharing. We find more than anything, the history of the drive-in and the history of our business is what people eat up more than anything.
Absolutely. It's really been fun to learn about this whole world that I kind of knew about it. I'm from a small town in Ohio called Creston. And, I think there were 2,000 people that lived there, maybe
right.
a little bit more then. But Creston had its own drive-in theater. It wasn't open when I was there, but the structure was still there. I mean, like they were just everywhere.
And that was a Selby Screen, I take it.
I think it was, yes.
I mean, in that area, it must just be littered. And the area that you guys are in is so fantastic with even modern day drive-ins. There's still a good amount in Ohio. So let's go into your guys' history just in general and with drive-ins. Do you guys, all three of you, have that childhood memory or childhood connection with drive-ins? And side note, was that a Selby Screen?
So I can lead a little bit there. So I was born in 62, so I grew up in the 70s. And so drive-ins were very much part of my life. And kind of that, that whole idea of, taking a date in a car and being able to be on your own and have your own private space, that was really, really attractive.
Oh, yeah.
And then, the other thing is it's, you're kind of outside, you're watching a movie. It's sort of like a combination of watching a movie and camping at the same time. Yep. So it was this total adventure. And then you're talking about specific memories. I'll share one of my memories that involves one of the other guests on this show. So Zach's first drive-in movie was when he was about 7 or 8 months old. And and it was here in the Magic City Drive-In here in Barberton, Ohio.
Right.
And unfortunately, neither Zach nor I remember what was playing, but I do remember going there when he was just a baby.
That's incredible. That's always the case, by the way. Every single guest we talk to, it's never the movie. They can never remember the movie. It's all about the experience. It's all about the things that happened while they were there. It's incredible how that happens. The movies really do become secondary.
And doesn't that say a whole lot about this culture and kind of one of the primary draws here is like it's the experience and not, the content of what you're watching.
Absolutely. People come to us and say, it's amazing that you guys have been able to make the retro model work. And it's like, if we were running first run movies, we would put just as much love and passion into each show that we do. I think it goes beyond what's up on the screen. And we say that often, you could come and not even stay until sundown and get your money's worth at the Mahoning. It's really a special thing to offer. So how about you, Dave? The history with drive-ins?
Yep, I'm of Mark's vintage as well. So growing up in the 60s and 70s, we had the Skyline Theater in Worcester.
Yep.
Which is now closed. And then the Blue Sky Theater in Wadsworth. Wadsworth is a little bit closer. And that was definitely a Selby Screen there. In fact, I think they may have even owned that at one point or maybe built it for themselves.
Yeah.
But we started going with my parents, when I was probably, I don't even know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
I remember watching a movie about Bigfoot back then, and thinking that it was real,
Yeah.
And then as we got older, we started going in high school. That was, like Mark said, that was a place you could have a little private space with your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd go with the boys. We'd go watch a horror film, and probably throw a couple of beers in the back.
Yeah, sure.
Pile in the car and go have a good time. We just love doing that, and it gave us a little bit of independence, and it was entertaining.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got great memories of those days. So it's been fun to get back in it and sort of relive some of those memories with owners around the state, and
it's just fantastic. And that's the beautiful thing, the carryover of the love that you guys experienced early on and how you can really put that into what you guys do today. So I'm curious, because you brought it up, at what point did Selby start just opening drive-ins where they were like, well, we are kind of the first stop when it comes to opening a drive-in. Why don't we do this thing?
Yeah, I think it was probably in the 70s, from what I could remember what Jerry told me. And, they'd get them up and running, and then they would sell them typically. Yeah. So they got to know the business inside and out. They got to know it from an owner's perspective, as well as being just, the contractor. So they had a deep knowledge of how the business works and what makes it tick, what makes a good movie theater experience happen,
And makes it viable and potentially sellable.
That's right.
So do you guys know how many over the years that they owned, operated, and or sold off?
I don't know how many. Not a lot.
Right. It's not like, oh my gosh, they had 100 in Ohio at one point.
No. Yeah. I think they had a few, but not. They weren't a big chain of them or anything. Their money was building them. And Jerry would tell me stories that they were building them so quickly that they would go out on the road and not come back for months. They would build one and go to the next site and go to the next site and go to the next site. And they would just ship the steel out to the crews who were remote and just literally had that much work going that they would stay out on the road for months at a time, just building these things. And they would even pre-build the trusses, so they would have them in stock. So if an owner called up, they could beat anybody when it came to getting something produced and erected on site.
The turnover time,
that's right. And one of the magical parts about the Selby way, we'll call it, is that it looks really easy when we come out on site, because they got everything down to a T. Every move that you make is premeditated, and we know what's going on. And so we'll typically build one. We'll show up on Monday and we'll be packing it up on Friday. I mean, it's like magic, right? I mean, it's just crazy, and people drive by and they can't believe how fast it was. But that's not
up already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it doesn't take much. All the work is done behind the scenes. So they've got it engineered in such a way that all the long and drawn out work occurs in the shop in controlled conditions, with an inspector there. And then once everything's built, it's like a big erector set. They just get a crane out there, bolt them together, and away they go.
It's amazing. Now, how much over the years has the designs changed, the planning and processing? Have you guys found that those 75 years have allowed you to kind of polish the gem, so it's you've gotten to a point where you feel pretty confident that this is the strongest you can be?
Yeah. So as engineer, I'll take that. I mean, fundamentally, the designs are quite similar to what they were 70, 75 years ago. Their designs are really, I think the overused term these days is robust, which means they're just strong as can be.
Sure.
They're truss steel towers with, very substantial reinforced concrete footers. And over the years, the improvements, I would say, have been kind of evolutionary. There have been improvements to reduce the corrosion from the decades of exposure. Also improvements to the screen surface materials and the paint that's used for good image quality. The underground footers that the structure is anchored to has been optimized and is really, really quite substantial. There's no such thing as too much concrete.
Right.
And you talked about processes. The other big changes over the decades is really in how the screens are erected. So we're using a lot less of the, sort of tie a rope to a truck method that you might have seen actually, as was pretty dramatically shown in Jan Krawitz's, Drive-In Blues documentary.
Oh yeah,
they've got ropes and trucks. That's, it's gotten quicker and more safe, and there's a lot more kind of mechanization that's used in the erection, which is one of the reasons why Dave was talking about showing up on Monday and driving away on Friday, and we've seen these things go up in 3 days. Here's a fun little sort of engineering fact. You were talking about the wind loads and the storms.
Yeah.
So a pretty common zoning design criteria is for 90-mile-an-hour wind force. And at that speed, a typical screen will generate about 50,000 pounds of wind force trying to blow it over. So it's kind of like the weight of a semi trying to push it
running
over.
right into your material.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would say that the changes in design are mostly evolutionary and not major changes.
And also, if I could add, we were talking about erecting screens. There's a great video on Tiffin's Facebook page. They took down their old screen, and then they actually recorded the process of us putting up a Selby screen.
Yes.
Really well filmed, lots of good information in there. So definitely worth checking out.
We love the Tiffin. That's amazing. See, and that's the thing. Even in these interviews that we've been conducting with owners, we're now going to try to work in that question of if they know who built their screen, because we're so curious now on how wide your reach goes, which I guess you guys know. Like, was there a limit to how far you guys went? Or were you like, hey, you're in California, you need a screen, we're your guys?
There was no limit geographically. I remember Jerry once told me a story about being approached by the Russians. And they got cold feet. It wasn't
trying to figure out how you're going to make a project like that work.
I don't think they trusted the ruble enough to go over there and do it. So
sure.
It wasn't geographic, though. I mean, I think they did one in Japan. They did one in Puerto Rico. Yeah, I mean, they've gone all over the place with these things.
That's incredible. That is just incredible. Well, now, where do you guys find that the majority of your business comes from? Do you still see a big percentage of work at drive-ins, or has a lot of that kind of shifted to other bits of business?
Well, the business that we're in is just the drive-in movie theater screen. So the other businesses that Dave was referring to earlier, those were separated companies. So we're just doing the drive-in movie theater screens. Obviously, the pace that we're doing them is dramatically less, right? So this is not a full-time endeavor anymore like it used to be.
Right.
I would say that it's not uncommon for people to either upgrade their screens to a Selby screen, or you'll have a, as Dave learned, a blow down where you'll have a, telephone pole and plywood screen that'll blow down in a storm.
Yep.
And we'll go back in and put in a Selby screen.
You're the saviors.
Yeah. Zach has pretty specific. You're talking about the geographic reach. I think Zach has pretty thorough knowledge on
we're so curious on what drive-ins specifically, you guys are responsible for, really, because when it comes to the experience and the wow factor of a drive-in, when you see that towering screen, there is nothing like it. I mean, it's the reason that we're all here, the three of us, is it just captured our hearts seeing an image seemingly larger than life up in front of your eyes. So
yeah, and I would say that's again, using that overused word, it is literally larger than life. One of the few times you can really say that.
Right. True.
Zach, do you want to talk a bit about the market and all the states that we're in and how many screens there are and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I'll give you the headline numbers there. So when I first started doing this research, I was surprised by just how many drive-ins are still in the U.S. There's 345 locations across the United States.
Yep.
They're in every single state aside from Hawaii, North Dakota, and Alaska. I guess no surprise there for Alaska.
Sure.
And most locations have more than one screen. So there's a total of 558 screens across the nation. Yeah. Most of the locations are kind of centered around Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and then also a large group in Texas and California as well.
Right. Now, do you guys know of the number of screens remaining that are yours?
Yeah, I can tell you the exact number. So of the 558 screens remaining, we have built 109 of them.
Stop. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that is right there the mark of longevity, to say like, hey, we've literally stood the test of time to the point where, 1/3 of the screens across the country are ours.
Right. And some of the screens that were built in the early stages back 70 years ago, they're still standing.
And one of the takeaways from that, that 1/3, 2/3, one of our thoughts on that is like, that means there's 2/3 of screens out there that we can go after.
Without a doubt. So is that a big part of your guys' business now, is reaching out to existing drive-ins and seeing what their needs may be?
Yeah. So I've started reaching out through Facebook to some of the drive-ins, and we've got a couple that we're talking to right now. But yeah, that is a big part of our business today.
It's so fantastic. I mean, we get the questions all the time from people who are in that mode of, this is all I want. This is my dream. I want to be able to open a drive-in. Your guys' story inspires me. And that has crossed over into the podcast and the people who follow us. And I know it, the people who are inspired and the drive-ins of the future, having a place to go as a starting point is so essential to keeping that dream alive. Because sometimes, especially when it comes to things that are larger than life, it seems too big to even imagine. And you guys put a true structure to that dream and say, here's exactly how we can make it happen. Here's what it's going to cost, And
that's one of the advantages, is that since this is the line of business, if you just called some contractor out there to do this, they would have to basically reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
To get this thing done. And what contractors have learned apparently is that, they can't charge enough to go up the learning curve. Right. And so we become almost the de facto go-to if people know who we are, because they know that we can get these things built, and we can get it built quickly, and they'll be reliable, and they'll be of top-notch quality.
If you want to drive in the screen, you go to Selby. There's no question about it.
That's the idea. Yeah.
We like hearing that. And, the other thing from a kind of a macro business point of view is this is a pretty attractive, very small business for us, for one person in this industry, but it becomes much less attractive as soon as you get, two people trying to divide up a very small pie.
Yeah.
And as Dave said, the learning curve for figuring out how to do this, it's like, as a general contractor, they just would not want to spend the time to learn that and then, have the opportunity to build a screen a year or something like that.
It's similar to what we find with our 35 millimeter techs. There's a certain era of folks that was their knowledge base, is they know how to do it. And then at a certain point, it's just, there was no need to learn it. So now it's become truly an obsolete skill set.
I think that's a great analogy. That's a really good analogy. It's good. It's good for one or two or a few, but it's not good for many.
Right. Absolutely. So through your guys' rich history and the business's rich history, are there any kind of choice stories or incidents of building, construction, or constructing the screens, or projects that started and kind of puttered out? Did you guys find that that's something that happened throughout the history?
Beginning with the last question first, absolutely. We will work with developers or site owners or whoever they are, to do a cost analysis and see if they can make this a viable operation. We've done a number of workups for people to see if they could make a go of it and, go back to their investors and so forth. And not all the projects go forward. That's just the way it goes. I mean,
sure.
That's just kind of what, and on the construction piece, every construction project has a new surprise lying in wait for you. You never know what it's going to be. Underground site conditions, for example, especially on an old movie theater site, you don't know what's down in there. Typically, there's old footers and steel and all kinds of things in there, because our footers are very large. So you've got a lot of soil to remove, and getting in there and working around what's there. I mean, we've run into, pre-existing old footers that were there that, we've had to somehow
find a way to remove.
God.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, just a nightmare. The other thing that you especially when we have these very long screen panels that we swing up there. If you see a black cloud on the horizon, you need to put your stuff away.
Yeah, there ain't no way that project's happening.
Because those winds will take, I mean, it's scary. You'll see these 50-foot long pieces of steel swinging in the breeze like a feather, and you don't want to be around that. So, safety comes first. And, when we see weather coming in, we batten down the hatches and wait for another day.
Yeah, everything's a halt. Well, that's the craziest thing is, as much as you plan, you have the history behind you, there is an element going into it where it's just like, even though this is all laid out for you, just be ready. There's a lot of other factors that come into play.
There certainly are. And so what you learn in the construction industry, probably like any other, is that you need to be able to think on your feet. We had one time, we had the torch tanks, one of the valves broke. A lot of times these screens are out in the middle of, nowhere, really. Yeah. I mean, if you're working over a weekend and you need some acetylene or something, you've got to work really hard to figure out how to find that, because you don't want to stop, right? You want to get these things up. You don't want to have to go back and restart the project. So
sure,
you'll learn how to really figure things out quickly to get the job done.
I'm curious because our property is a neighbor to an airport, a private airport, albeit, but we got planes coming in and out on a regular basis. If it were reversed and the airport were there pre-existing, does that create issues for you guys and where you can put your screens, I imagine?
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. So you're actually talking to at least 3 pilots on this end. So
I love it. You guys can fly on in.
I also looked at your thing. It looks like there's a little service road that connects the end of that airport to your screen.
Can literally.
So we could literally land and just walk over
man.
to meet with you guys. Yeah. So if your screen is not in the quote unquote right of way of the airport, and the airports do have right of ways, it would only be a problem if an airport was already there and somebody wanted to build a screen off of one end or the other of the runway pretty close to it.
Right.
But you'd have to be pretty close. These screens stick up, 60 feet or something like that, 60 feet-ish. So, if you're, I don't know what the actual number is, but if you're a half mile from the runway, you're good.
Well, I'm curious as an engineer, you are responsible for kind of recreating the landscape of the area and seeing your structures once they're done and have kind of come to fruition. Is there a level of proud for you that's just like jumping out of your body? Like, we saw this, that we made this happen.
That's a great question. So it's one of the reasons why I like mowing my yard, is like when I start and I usually wait too long. And then when I'm done, I look back at that, a few hours later and go, damn, that looks really good.
Like, look at me.
But when you put up a screen, it's such an imposing structure that it's like there was nothing there before. Yeah. And now there's this huge ass structure there. And we did that. So it's pretty cool.
That's the amazing thing, the visual tie-in. And a lot of the drive-ins owners that we're speaking to, they're in totally, flatland areas where you can see their screen for practically miles, and still it's one of those visuals that the abandoned drive-ins, in a certain area of the country, you can see those screens, so far away. And it becomes part of the landscape and a part of what people love about the drive-in, as much as our marquee is a part of the township's layout and a part of their treasure, so is the screen, making that turn and seeing that big towering screen. It takes your breath away.
It is dramatic and it's not subtle.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm curious, being that you guys are drive-in fans, if you had the opportunity to run a drive-in for a night, do you have a go-to kind of dream double feature? Kind of just give people a taste of where your fandom lies?
I actually saw the movie Contact. I think that was one of the earliest memories I have at a drive-in. But watching Contact with that dark, starry night as the background was just incredible. So I think that would be my first one. And then to follow that up, Interstellar.
Two perfect space movies. We always say it. Space does amazingly at the drive-in because there's no separation. The screen, the sky, it's like your world has become the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
That is a great one.
Oh, that's great. How about you, Mark?
So I guess I would have two recommendations. One of them, which I'm sure you hear a lot, is showing kind of double features of an original and a modern remake. You know, like the Willy Wonka movies, or
I like this idea.
Yeah, the West Side Story movies, or I think there was a movie called The Thing that came out in '51, and then there was a remake in '82.
Oh yeah,
the Casino Royale remake. You know, those are pretty different.
You think like a programmer, my friend. And I like that. We actually have an event called Remake Double Take, which it's exactly that. This year we're doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original, and then the '78 remake.
Well, I knew I wasn't creative there, but I'm glad I'm at least sort of batting with the players. So
heck
great.
Yeah. That'll draw a crowd. That's a profitable night right there.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to appeal to tons of people like me. The other one, which is really kind of nerdy, is I was a huge fan of those Mystery Science Theater 3000 shows that were on in the 90s and the double aughts.
My man, yep.
And they were like this old spoof of bad sci-fi movies. And like as a nerd, I kind of like the sci-fi movies to start with. But kind of the premise is that you're watching a small audience, which was like originally I think it was Joel Hodgson, and later on it was Mike Nelson. So maybe you're related to Mike. Who knows, Mark?
And no relation as far as I know, but if there's money in it for me, I'll pursue it.
Yeah. And each of these guys, they would have like these robot friends that would be forced to watch this bad sci-fi movie. And so it's kind of like, and then they would be making fun of the movie constantly.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like you're in a movie, watching a movie, which seems a little bit like the drive-in experience. So I think it'd be fun to string 2 or 3 of those together in a night, and maybe have like an MST3K Monday or something.
Yes,
like that.
Come on. There is a perfect crossover with the love of the drive-in and the Mystery Science crowd, without a doubt.
Yeah.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, well, I love Mark's Mystery Science Theater answer, because I used to love. The first time I turned that on, I'm like, "What is going on?" When I was very young, I don't know if you guys remember, the Ghoul was on. Ghoulardi.
Oh yeah,
Ghoulardi
was the king, really.
Yeah, so I grew up with that. So when Mystery Science Theater came on, I fell right in line with that. Campy movies with funny commentary running alongside of it. Since I am a child of the 60s and 70s, I would probably go into the dark side a little bit. I love the old scary movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think it's a masterpiece for a horror film. And, maybe something a little less scary, but, something like The Blob. To me, those kinds of movies just go there, probably because I watched them at the Blue Sky Theater or someplace at one point.
I mean, the horror stuff really lends itself. If you're watching a movie based outside, surrounded by woods,
exactly.
It's like, you couldn't pay for a better set design.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I know Jeff has to run for an appointment, so I want to give him the opportunity to ask you guys any questions that might be on his mind.
Yeah, I don't know, you guys, what kind of a detailed photo you looked at when you saw our drive-in. I was always curious who built our screen, because it's not like it's all steel girders, and it's massive. And I'm just wondering, because back in 1949, it was built with all Bethlehem steel. That I can figure out. That we figured out. But who is building screens like that? And I know you won't be able to tell if you didn't see a detailed photo of our screen. You probably won't be able to tell me, but I've seen a couple screens like it, but those drive-ins are long since gone. Ours is the only one that I can even find anymore.
It's kind of like corrugate metal on the front, like a wavy.
Well, yeah, but that was typical. But I mean, the back of it, I'm talking the steel girders and the and the massive footers. And I mean, it's
So I haven't seen any pictures up close. I've seen pictures from afar, and I think Zach has characterized the yellow screen, a year or so ago. But I don't have enough detail to be able to tell who would have built that. But it does sound like it becomes a destination for us to check out as we're flying through there. Since you're right next to an airport, we might have to
drop
check it
on
out.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do. I would love to have you take a look at it and see if you have any idea who was building screens like that back then, especially on the East Coast. There were a couple in Allentown that had these huge steel screens like ours, but they're all gone now. As far as screen construction, and I look at it when I see photos of other drive-ins, ours is the only screen left that I know of. It even has a walkway across the top, a catwalk. It's massive on the back. And I'm just wondering who did that back then. So yeah, you guys got to come on down and take a look at it.
We'd love to.
Well, that kind of is the question. I mean, you guys are the kings of the industry. Did you have a lot of competition pop up over the history of Selby?
Well, we weren't really around, back then when they were doing it. But it seems to me that they didn't. And I think mainly because they already had it figured out, right? And so if other people were trying to enter the market, Selby already, had good pricing. They could get them erected in no time flat. I think they were able to, keep the competition out. That's why they're still here today doing them.
Yeah. Well, you guys said it. You were there at the right time, or they were there at the right time. It was a situation that, as the industry boomed, it created a need. And, the Selbys really found a way to fill that need in the best way possible, to the point that they're still rocking 75 years later. It's just
amazing.
Incredible. Well, I'm curious, because you guys are so active out there still, how would our drive-in fans or the drive-in fans across the world find you guys and follow you guys or get in contact with you guys if they're ready to take the jump?
Zach, that was a softball pitch to you.
Yeah, so we're pretty active on Facebook. If you just Google, or if you search Selby Screens on Facebook, we'll pop up. We're pretty well connected with all the drive-ins across the states, so you'll see us there. We also have a website, selbyscreens.com. We've got some old ads, some basic information, and some pictures of more recent builds that we've done. And we've also got an Instagram page, Selby Screens.
We are really into the old school snipes and ads and things like that. Being that you guys are a 75-year-old business, do you guys have any of that stuff laying around? Old promotional materials, things like that, ads that you used to send out?
I have one old ad that used to be pretty popular, but finding this stuff is just so challenging.
Needle in a haystack now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always my biggest thing talking to these long-term, long-running businesses, is especially ones that embrace their history, is if they have any of that old material. When we talk to Ricos and folks like that, it's like it's such a long-running history, you never know if there's a box of gold laying around.
Right.
Well, we can't tell you guys enough how much we appreciate not only what you're doing now, but what Selby has done for this industry. The fact that we have a strong-standing drive-in movie theater screen company is incredible. So you guys are doing the Lord's work. Continue rocking it.
Well, I just couldn't say what a privilege it is to be on your show, and this is really very much appreciated. We think this is great. So thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a dream for us. I mean, like we said, we got into this to save a singular drive-in, and we've been blessed with the voice to be able to speak on drive-ins and the culture and speak to the people who really appreciate and long for that nostalgia. And, again, this is exactly why we started the podcast, so we can talk to folks like you guys. So the pleasure's all ours. All right. I think on that note, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.